for a long time, people have used, archaeology and or languages, and then more recently genes to kind of study the way that different cultures have moved in the past, and which people have moved from where at what time, who's kind of split off from who at what point in history, based on similarities in the languages or similarities in their genes. And we think that music might have the potential to sort of be a new marker that can add to what we know through those other markers. So our project really is building on the work of Alan Lomax, who lived. He was born in 1915. He passed away about 9 years ago, and he did a really great study of he was the first, and until us, kind of the last to try to map the world pattern of singing or of song. But what he was really interested was not so much the structure of the songs, not so much the notes. He kind of thought that was just a Western culture focused too much on the notes, the pitches, the rhythms. He was more interested in the actual singing style, the vocal qualities, like whether people sang with very open, wide voices like "oh," or whether they had very kind of rasp or harsh, narrow voices like kind of things. And he thought that the way that people sang was really reflected the kind of social structure of the society. So if you come from a very equal hunter-gatherer society, you'd sing in a very kind of equal group blended way with very matched voices. And if you came from a very rigid hierarchical society, you'd have like a soloist singing in a very nasal, harsh voice and being backed up by kind of the peasants of the orchestra. So he was really interested in the singing style and its connection with social structure. We're a little bit more interested in not this kind of social structure idea, but the migration idea. And we think that the structure of songs, the notes, might be more stable over time for long periods of time, might be a better kind of marker of which cultures are more recently split up, in history. Yeah, so we hope that it can really add to the existing knowledge about prehistoric migration. So we talk about historic migrations, when there's written documentation, it's quite easy to tell who came from where. Christopher Columbus, left Italy in 1492 and crossed the Pacific, or the Atlantic. It's all very, very clear. But when you're dealing with genes and languages and archaeology, it's very unclear, and we don't really know that well. There's lots of problems with the type, with using language or using genes. They all have their own problems. So we think, there are some cases like the idea of this Austronesian migration out of Taiwan or into Taiwan, where the genetic evidence and the linguistic evidence, the archaeological evidence, they all kind of conflict. So we think maybe music might be able to kind of help understand the story a little bit better. One cool thing about it is, with languages, you kind of have, there's not a lot of diversity within a given culture. So most people from one culture will speak one language, but they can be very diverse genetically. They can have different ethnic backgrounds, can all be in the same culture, but all speaking the same language. And musically, you can also be quite diverse. You can have many different song types. So we think maybe that the diversity of music might better reflect the diversity of genetic backgrounds than the sort of language. Well, so far we're finding in the paper, it's still kind of preliminary, and we're still analyzing more songs, trying to get more data from more tribes. But so far we're finding strikingly strong correlations between musical similarity and genetic similarity among the tribes in Taiwan. So this is the first time that anyone's really tried to do this quantitatively. So it suggests that really, a lot of when we first started off on this project, people said, there's no way that music is going to be a good marker of human migration because it doesn't have a deep enough time depth. People change their songs all the time. We have pop music coming in and replacing all these traditional songs. So there's no way that you're going to be correlated with genes, when you go back thousands of years or whatever. But it looks, it looks like, at least in Taiwan, we're finding some pretty strong correlations that suggest these might go back a long time. It could even go back further than languages, which you can usually only reconstruct linguistic similarities for about maybe 10,000 years max. There are some suggestions that songs might go back as 30,000, 40,000 years, could be even more. I mean, we don't know yet, but at least in this case, the Aboriginal tribes of Taiwan are thought to have arrived in Taiwan about 6,000 years ago, And so it may be that music is tracking at least 6,000-year-old kind of divergence. So if we sort of, as you said, it's a little bit technical, but we can use the same kinds of techniques that geneticists use to calculate, genetic similarities between two tribes. We can do the same thing to calculate musical similarities between two tribes, looking at all the different, even though there's all these different kinds of songs, you can sort of map out all the songs of this tribe and how similar they are to all the songs of this other tribe. You can do the same thing with genes. And when you kind of calculate that and come up with numbers, you find that the more different two tribes are musically, the more different they tend to be genetically, and the more similar they are musically, the more similar they tend to be genetically. So you get quite a strong correlation. But we're looking now at the Philippines also, and we've got about 9 tribes from Taiwan and 9 tribes from the Philippines, and but we don't have all the genetic data yet because it hasn't been very well studied. It looks like it might not work quite as well when we include the Philippines too. So we're not sure whether that's just we don't have a good enough sample, because the music in Taiwan is very, very well recorded, very well documented. We know which tribe sings which song. Philippines, it's quite messy. It's just a lot of old recordings lying around. No one knows a lot about them. So it may actually not work after all. Maybe music isn't a good migration marker. Or maybe there's something interesting going on and it doesn't match with genetics for some other reason, or maybe it does match with genetics, we just don't have enough samples yet. So we're trying to look at Taiwan and the Philippines, because there's a lot of debate about did people move out of Taiwan to the Philippines, from the Philippines into Taiwan, was the homeland of this migration in Taiwan or further south. I don't think we have enough evidence musically or genetically to say at this point. Although linguistically, people are pretty clear it was Taiwan out of the Philippines. Out of Taiwan into the Philippines, but there just isn't enough samples musically and genetically yet to really be clear about it. One thing that's not matching right now is there's the Amis tribe and the Tao or the Yami tribe. Genetically, they're very similar, but musically, they're very different. But in this case, they're also very different linguistically. So, in this case, maybe the music and the language are matching better than they are with genes. So maybe there was more of a cultural replacement without actually people moving in. Maybe it was more of a culture being changed while the people stayed the same. I don't know. So the Amis and the Tao songs that I was talking about. So we're working on techniques to kind of map out, to visualize these ideas instead of just hearing it or talking about it. So the points here, each point represents a song. The color tells you which tribe it's being sung in. And songs that are closer together are more similar on a number of different features that we classify it on. So these are a bunch of Amis songs. And if I play it. So it's got quite a sort of wide open feel overall. So both in terms of singing and the song structure. So quite a wide voice, like a clear, wide voice, and quite large intervals, a large range. So it's quite an open vocal style and quite a very wide range, goes up and down, right? And then you have so there's a song from the Tao. Here we go. Yeah. So here's a song from the Tao. So it's a much more kind of narrow and small interval kind of size. So that's just and there's. We classify many different features, but just sort of overall they are quite different on all these features. I do think that it has maybe something to offer more than, not saying it's better than genes or languages, but I think it might have something different that it can add that genes and languages don't have. So I guess what our kind of take on it is we think that music kind of lies in between genes and languages as far as what they tell. So genes tell you a lot about the people. Which people have moved from where, but it doesn't necessarily tell you about the movement of cultures. So you can have well, in the Austronesian case, there's actually a lot of debate about in island Southeast Asia and Indonesia. It seems like the genetic stuff and the linguistic stuff doesn't match so much. It seems like maybe the people kind of stayed there, and then these Austronesian migrants came in and brought their languages and their culture, their pottery, but maybe they didn't really, kind of replace them as far as people, but maybe they just mixed interbred. So language tells you a lot about culture, but it doesn't give you a very good sense of the diversity within that culture. Just sort of, this is the culture, we speak this language. Genes tells you a lot about the people, but they don't tell you so much about the cultural things. But music is definitely a cultural product. It's part of culture. But because it is diverse like genes, it might give us a better sense of sort of the diversity and the kind of the interactions that happen when these two cultures meet. So that's where we think it might be kind of adding something that genes and languages alone won't tell us.